Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Would you like a cup of tea? It is a question we have been asked or have asked others the world over. It is this offer of a cuppa or a brew that always brims with positive connotations. It often signifies an opening up, a welcome and acceptance into what was once a closed environment, an invitation into someone's personal space. It can also signify a rite of passage, a promotion, and such was the case with my very first interview for my first teaching job, as I was singled out by the interviewer and asked, "Would you like a cup of tea?" which she proceeded to make on my behalf. A gesture which only I had the privilege of experiencing, as she sent all the other candidates to make their own. I quickly realised that such treatment, this non-verbal cue, had singled me out as the favoured candidate, and sure enough, by the end of the day, I was offered the job. What are the origins of tea drinking? Around 3,000 years ago, legend has it that the Chinese emperor Shen Nung was sitting under a tree while his servant was boiling drinking water when a leaf from a tree plant, Camellia sinensis, fell into the cup by chance. Another version of events state that the same emperor had accidentally poisoned himself, but by chance a leaf from a nearby tree fell into his mouth and revived him. The earliest recordings of the sale of tea in London's coffee houses are from around 1657, but when did our obsession with tea begin? Was it in 1662 when Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess who became queen to Charles II, brought the trend of tea drinking from the continent to England? Was it a box of tea acquired around 1700 by a ship's surgeon, James Cunningham, who gave it to the collector James Sloane, whose own personal collection evolved into the beginnings of the Natural History Museum? Or was it a Scottish botanist disguised as a Chinese nobleman who smuggled it out of China in the 1800s? Through the British East India Company, 1600 to 1874, and its formal trading with China, tea, as with many other foodstuffs from countries around the world, has helped to shape our social values, but it also has a checkered past, contributing to the momentum of the Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840, and through its associations with revolution, enslavement and colonialism, tea has supported the rise and fall of the British Empire. The Boston Tea Party on December the 16th, 1773 was a response from frustrated American colonists who dumped 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company at Griffiths Harbour in protest at Mother England's imposition of taxation without representation. Eventually, after a decade of war and eventual independence achieved by the 13 colonies, British Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger slashed the tax on tea, which not only made it unprofitable for smugglers, but made it affordable to the middle classes and eventually the working class. Tea drinking actually suited the British climate, as boiling water had a sterilising effect for washing, cooking and cleaning, alleviating some of the waterborne health hazards such as dysentery, typhoid and cholera. Tea often provided warmth and comfort to the workers in the hot, humid factories, but it also required something to sweeten the taste. Sugar. At the turn of the 18th century, drinking tea was not the only social statement. Sugar in tea was also a statement of wealth, but having tea without sugar became a political statement to boycott the sugar industry due to its links to slavery in the sugarcane plantations of the Caribbean. At this time, leading abolitionists such as Olada Equiana and Ignatius Sanchez drew momentum from this boycott to fuel their campaign to end slavery, which was finally granted in Britain in 1807 and then across its empire in 1833. Hong Kong, a southern peninsula off the mainland of China, was acquired by the British and used as a port during the occupation of the British East India Company in India. The production of tea began and, up until that time, was exclusively in China. Portuguese and Dutch merchants were importing black tea and green tea from their own trading bases in China and were transporting these back to Europe from as far back as the early 1600s. In an attempt to overthrow the monopoly of production in China, the British East India Company brought samples to grow in India, as its soil and climate was also perfect for planting tea. First in Assam in the 1830s and later planting in the mountainous region around Darjeeling in the 1850s. Prior to this, the British financed their consumption of tea through the trading of precious metals with China, which proved very costly until the British East India Co. developed a product that China wanted, a drug called opium. Soon cases of opium traded in exchange for tea, but this had an adverse side effect as opium became an addiction for millions of China's population. The Chinese emperor of the Qing dynasty at the time finally made the opium trade illegal, confiscating several thousand chests of opium, and due to this, the British took action. After the First Opium War, 1839-42, and the Second Opium War, 1856-60, the British prevailed and China was forced to sign the treaties of Nanking in 1841 and Shenzhen in 1858, allowing the British to trade freely in everything, including opium. Through adopting the open door policy, China was forced to open up its ports not only to Britain, but to other European countries over time, and was also forced to pay reparations for the cost of both wars. It was the Treaty of Nanking that ceded Hong Kong port along with its island, making it a British Crown colony in 1843. This extended to the Kowloon Peninsula in 1860, all acquired, as well as the new territories, through a 99-year lease in 1898, which expired in 1997. It is a common belief that, while mainland China was never formally colonised, this system of trade and such a sudden and dramatic shift in its foreign policy contributed towards China's anti-Western sentiment and formation as a republic. But did the open door policy actually work to China's benefit, working in the long term to prevent it from becoming just another European colony? From 2019 and throughout the pandemic of 2020, attempts to enforce national security laws from Beijing has threatened the autonomy that Hong Kong has enjoyed under the People's Republic of China, an autonomy stipulated in Article 2 of the Hong Kong Basic Law, ratified by the British Sino Joint Declaration. At the time of this podcast, we observe the 26th anniversary since the lease expired in 1997 and marks just over halfway through the agreed transition period of a one country, two systems process, overseen by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. However, these law enforcements has caused tension with large-scale political demonstrations, violent clashes between police and protesters, and large numbers of Hong Kong residents migrating to Britain. Once known as the Fragrant Harbour, it has developed from a simple fishing port into a major financial centre. However, like any other country today, Hong Kong faces challenges to its economy due to rising interest rates, a possible correction in its housing market, and partly due to COVID and a war in Europe, the effects of high inflation and global economic slowdown in productivity and manufacturing. Over the next 24 years, it will be interesting to see how Hong Kong will evolve as the transition date of 2047 draws ever closer to its final assimilation into the People's Republic's socialist policies and systems. The outcomes of the conflict still remain inconclusive, and it is still unclear what China's agenda really is. A deflection away from its own internal weaknesses as exposed by COVID? A statement of power to Europe and the West? Or a redefining of its status within the impending New World Order? If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform and check out the original episode for the basis of this reprise. Anyone for Tea? The Colonisation of Hong Kong, which is in the first season, and Painting the Map Red, is China breaking up the Commonwealth, from the second season. The links are in the show notes. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. If you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. And as it's the 26th anniversary of the end of British occupation in Hong Kong, our July promotion for one lucky subscriber to my newsletter is a copy of The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong. It's also the month of American independence, but as I gave away a copy of Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York as my first giveaway back in February, I thought it would be a good balance to focus on Hong Kong, but still say happy independence to all our cousins across the pond. But for this podcast episode, I think I'll make an exception and place the links for both of these titles in the show notes. Now, if you're not a part of the email list, visit storiestobetold.com and sign up, where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. Remember, entering the email list is the only way to enter the draw for a chance to win a giveaway. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes. So don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share me on social media when you visit the website. Just click on whichever social media link you'd like to follow me on. And, as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next page.